Architect Arif Belgaumi is a practicing architect and has headed a small architectural firm in Karachi since 2000. He received a Bachelor of Arts in Design of the Environment and a Master's in Architecture from the University of Pennsylvania. After completing his studies, Arif worked for a number of years in Philadelphia before returning to Pakistan in 1998. In the past 12 years, Arif Belgaumi Architects has developed a select portfolio of works ranging from commercial interiors and residences to the recently completed design of the new Embassy of Afghanistan complex in Islamabad. The firm's works explore Arif's long-standing interest in the contemporary and modern expression of regional architectures. Arif is active in architectural education and coordinates the fourth-year architecture studio at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. He has also taught architectural theory at the University of Karachi. Arif has wide-ranging interests which inform his work. He is a vocal opponent of environmental degradation and poor planning in Karachi and has written numerous newspaper articles about the preservation of the natural environment and the need for the safe and sustainable development in our urban areas. He is also active in the development of standards and codes in Pakistan and serves on various committees developing the Energy Code, the Fire Code and other standards. He also represents the PCAP as a member of the Pakistan Standards Authority's Civil Engineering National Standards Committee. May I please have you on stage, Arif? Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, my hope is that in due course I'll be able to explain this title. Let's see. I would like to propose today that we have conquered the limits imposed on us by geography. The world as we see it today is closely wired and interconnected. Ideas and images are shared around the globe at the speed of light. The ideas and images we are discussing at this forum this afternoon could potentially be debated in real time by people anywhere on this planet. In spite of the few dark areas that we see on the image behind me, we can confidently assert that the distances in geographical conditions, I can't read in the dark here. I need a light. I just completely missed the whole paragraph. Okay. Yeah, it's better. Okay. Where was I? The ideas and images we are discussing at this forum this afternoon could potentially be debated in real time by people anywhere on this planet. In spite of the few dark areas we see on the image behind me, we can confidently assert that the distances and geographical conditions which in the past had separated and isolated people and limited the dispersal of architectural ideas have dissolved. But does that mean then that we are all speaking the same language, talking about the same issues, addressing the same problems, the same solutions? And I present what we all seem to want to aspire to, or so it would seem. Fortunately, I can state with an equally high degree of confidence that there remain significant differences, regional particularities, geographical, cultural, and economical disparities that are the fuel for architectural discourse and demand unique design solutions to address them. These differences stem from the cultural and religious diversity of the planet to the climatic, environmental, and economic differences that confront us and the myriad of unique problems that demand our attention on a daily basis. The current information age that we live in is therefore a time of great opportunities and an egalitarian age like no time before it. This age of no geographical barriers demands that we identify and address the issues that are pertinent and essential to us and take advantage of the new connectivities to debate ideas and propose solutions. It wasn't like this always, and I will need to talk a little bit about history to explain the role, if any, that geography has had on the dissemination and exchange of architectural ideas. I've gone really far back, okay? Geography has never been much of a barrier for the transmission of architectural ideas, and wherever people have traveled or migrated, they've taken with them their traditional ideas of habitation and construction. But during the vast majority of human existence, the exchange of ideas and the architecture The exchange of ideas and the architectural discourse across geographical boundaries and regions has been restricted by or biased towards the superior or more advanced society participating in the exchange. The stronger the original culture, the more persistent and prevalent were its art and architecture. One of the earliest examples is the Greek civilization. During the Hellenic age, the nominal democratic city-state, the polis, was the principal center of political life and source of a Greek's identity and allegiance. As the original city-states grew too large to be sustained by the resources of their countryside, bodies of Greek citizens moved out to colonize areas beyond the known boundaries of Greece, first to the east along the Aegean, and then to the west along the coasts of Albania, Sicily, southern Italy, southern coast of France, Corsica, and Spain. The successive waves of colonization spread Greek values, culture, and architecture to relatively far-flung areas. Having a well-formed sense of architecture really helped because the cities that grew up very much reflected that ideal. The expansion of Greek culture and architecture took a dramatic leap in the 4th century BC with the conquest of Alexander the Great, whose empire at its peak stretched from Egypt to India. Greek culture as the dominant civilization spread through the conquered territories, influencing their art and architecture. The art of the Gandhara civilization, which flourished in northern Pakistan in the centuries following Alexander's conquest, was a product of this geographically unbounded world and drew on Greek, Syrian, Persian, and Indian influences. The next great world civilization, the Romans, similarly exported their art and architecture to the far reaches of their political and military influence. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched from Britain in the west through most of Europe and the Near East and into North Africa. The Romans had a very ordered rectilinear form for their cities, which had mythical origins and had rituals which guided the planner and engineer in the laying and construction of the city. The slide I've put up is supposed to be a diagram of the Greek city, of the Roman city, showing a secured perimeter and a sacred center. Though they were not unique in this, in fact, all great civilizations practiced rectilinear planning. The breadth of their geographical expansion saw their architectural ideas get the broadest and greatest dispersal. Even today, one can observe the form of the Roman city embedded in the urban fabric of several ancient European cities. And I put up Florence, and you can see if this works. That's still Roman. Medieval clutter that followed. And the same for the old city of Lucca, where some of the best examples of Roman city planning and architecture are to be found in the far-flung corners of the Roman Empire. In Rome itself, the incremental organic growth of the city and the limitations of existing conditions prevented the exercise of the ideal Roman plan. But in places like North Africa, where they founded new cities like Timgad, the form of the urban Roman city can most clearly be observed. This is Timgad in Libya. I don't intend to dwell at length on the Greco-Roman era, except to illustrate that geography has never been much of a barrier for the transmission of architectural ideas, especially when accompanied by military might or by the certainty of cultural superiority. Whenever man has traveled across regions and continents, he has found architectural ideas to be relatively portable and easily marketable. Generally, the dominant, more advanced society has prevailed over the weaker partner in the cultural exchange, but history has shown us that the subjugated have their say as well. In more recent centuries, the colonization of Africa, Asia, and the Americas by the European powers saw European concepts and styles of architecture traveling to the far reaches of the globe. A quick survey of colonial architecture around the world shows distinct affinity to the European building type, modified to accommodate local climatic and technical conditions. This is a collection of colonial architecture from all over the world, from as far away as the Pacific to South America. Okay, where was I? Our own colonial experience in the Indian subcontinent is not much dissimilar. The only difference, perhaps, is that unlike many parts of the world colonized by Europeans, India had both a well-established and highly sophisticated architectural tradition, which not only varied regionally, but also had experienced centuries of continuous contacts with people of surrounding regions. For many millennia, India had seen waves of foreign invasions from the north and west, as well as extensive trading relations with peoples and kingdoms all around it. Each contact, whether violent or peaceful, carried with it the opportunity for cross-fertilization of ideas. Thus, India's architecture had drawn from the architecture traditions of its neighbors and in return had influenced their architecture and building technologies of the surrounding regions. And I've put up a picture of an Indian temple and the Cambodian palace of Angkor Wat to give you an example of the similarities in the architecture. The arrival of the British and their architecture was thus just another in a long line of violent cultural exchanges. The interaction between the colonial masters and the subjugated subcontinent had far-reaching effects on the architecture and art of both countries, but especially that of India. I have ironically put up a picture here of the Brighton Pavilion by John Nash, which is one of the probably the most significant influence of Indian architecture on a British building. Let's see, where was I? The introduction of British building forms and styles opened new vistas for architects and craftsmen in India. Indian stonemasons who had for generations plied their craft on traditional forms and patterns were introduced to a new architectural language and a radically different aesthetic. The British also introduced new building types necessitated by the introduction of the British system of governance and developed out of the technological advancement of the Industrial Revolution. Most prominent among these were the government institutions and railway stations. The British used these new building types to assert their hegemony over India, co-opting the symbols of authority of former Indian kings. In doing so, they created a style, a unique British colonial style, which combined elements of British and Indian architecture in a unique way. While it is customary to speak of architecture and the exchange of ideas at the level of people and cultures, I digress briefly to add that architecture is essentially the work of individuals, and it is really through the travels and observations of exceptional architects that the cross-fertilization of architectural ideas occurs. Our records of travels of architects through history is sketchy at best, but two facts are well known: that architects love to travel to obscure places to check out buildings, and that travel has been a constant source of inspiration and learning in the architect's professional development. Architects traveling to distant lands have returned with fresh new ideas and insights, and in return they have sometimes left their mark on the countries they have visited. The travels of many famous architects are well known. Brunelleschi's discovery of the architecture of the ancients in Rome, Richardson's study of the French Romanesque, Le Corbusier's extensive travels through Europe and the Aegean, Lucan's discovery of the monumentality of Rome, Robert Venturi's year at the American Academy in Rome. In short, it was customary for the budding architect to do the European tour, and if he was adventurous enough, perhaps add North Africa or the Near East to the itinerary. It appears, though, that Rome was a popular destination. And of course, for those who couldn't travel to Rome, and there was always Piranesi, whose etchings of the Vedute di Roma were mass-produced and distributed throughout Europe and became an important source of inspiration and imitation during the 18th and 19th century. Okay, I return back to the power play of nations and peoples. Even as the European powers were establishing their colonial empires throughout the world, new philosophies of architecture were developing under the influence of Enlightenment ideas. These ideas marked a move away from feudalism and absolutism towards capitalism, industrialization, secularization, rationalism, the nation state, and its constituent institutions. These ideas gave rise eventually to the modern movement in architecture, based on the belief that rational thought and technological advances could be applied to improve the social conditions of humanity. The natural extension of this led to the establishment of SIAM, a collaborative leading modern architects, and then eventually the international style. This is a picture of the group of architects who gathered for the first SIAM conference in La Saraz in 1928. A prominent group of them passed an important declaration, which, due to its length, I'm not going to read here. However, the preamble of the declaration read as follows. The undersigned architects, representing the national groups of modern architects, affirm the unity of viewpoint regarding the fundamental conceptions of architecture and their professional obligations towards society. They insist particularly on the fact that building is an elementary activity of man intimately linked with evolution and the development of human life. The destiny of architecture is to express the orientation of the age. Works of architecture can spring only from the present time. They therefore refuse categorically to apply in their working methods means that may have been able to illustrate past societies. They affirm today the need for a new conception of architecture that satisfies the spiritual, intellectual, and material demands of present-day life. Conscious of the deep disturbances of the social structure brought about by machines, they recognize that the transformation of the economic order and of social life inescapably brings with it its corresponding transformation of the architectural phenomenon. The intention that brings them together here is to attain the indispensable and urgent harmonization of the elements involved by replacing architecture on its true plane, the economic and sociological plane. Thus, architecture must be set free from the sterilizing grip of the academies that are concerned with preserving the formulas of the past. Animated by this conviction, they declare themselves members of an association and will give each other mutual support on the international plane with a view to realizing their aspirations morally and materially. The body of the declaration addresses typical modernist themes such as, I won't get into that, and was a proposal for a world architectural order. It and similar documents became the basis of a lot of urban planning and architecture in subsequent decades without engaging the specific needs and cultural aspirations of many of the voiceless developing countries where these theories were applied. The old colonial order more or less collapsed after the Second World War. As the world recovered from the devastation of the war, the former European powers, faced with massive reconstruction costs at home and nascent independence movements in their colonies, began to grant independence to their various overseas holdings. A large number of countries, particularly in the developing world, came into existence in the 2 decades following the end of the World War. In fact, between 1945, when the United Nations was founded, and 1965, 66 new countries were added to the original 51 countries that signed the UN Charter. Many of the prominent modernist architects found opportunities to apply their theories of a new architecture in the commission in these newly founded countries. Their designs sought to define an agenda for the architecture of the new country. Each proved in varying degrees to be influential in the local architectural discourse of the host country and served as a model for the first generation of indigenous architects. Valuable though it was to the development of the new country, it nevertheless precluded the local architects from formulating their own path, their own agenda, and their own priorities about their national architecture. It may have been that the national architectural profession at independence was not mature enough to undertake such an introspection. Nevertheless, the opportunity went begging, and in many cases, including Pakistan's, it's still wanting expression. Concerned by what he saw as the risk of a national and ethnic cultures being engulfed by expanding globalization, the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur in 1961 posed the paradoxical question confronting traditional civilizations racing towards modernity and progress. How can a people embrace universal civilization and be part of the global community while at the same time preserve the traditional and cultural and traditions and culture which may be the very raison d'etre of that nation? He wrote, "The phenomenon of universalization, while being an advancement of mankind, at the same time constitutes a sort of subtle destruction, not only of traditional cultures, which might not be an irreparable wrong, but also of what I shall call, for the time being, the creative nucleus of great cultures, that nucleus on the basis of which we interpret life, what I shall call in advance the ethical and mythical nucleus of mankind. The conflict springs up from there. We have the feeling that this single world civilization at the same time exerts a sort of attrition or wearing away at the expense of the cultural resources which have made the great civilizations of the past. This threat is expressed, among other disturbing effects, by the spreading before our eyes of a mediocre civilization, which is the absurd counterpart of what I was just calling elementary culture. Everywhere throughout the world, one finds the same bad movie, the same slot machines, the same plastic or aluminum atrocities, the same twisting of language by propaganda, etc. It seems as if mankind, by approaching en masse a basic consumer culture, were also stopped en masse at a subcultural level. Thus we come to this crucial problem confronting nations thus rising from underdevelopment. In order to get onto the road towards modernization, is it necessary to jettison the old cultural past which has been the raison d'etre of a nation? Whence the paradox. On the one hand, it has to root itself in the soil of its past, forge a national spirit, and unfurl the spiritual and cultural revindication before the colonial personality. But in order to take part in modern civilization, it is necessary at the same time to take part in scientific, technical, and political rationality, something which very often requires the pure and simple abandon of a whole cultural past. It is a fact every culture cannot sustain and absorb the shock of modern civilization. There is the paradox. How to become modern and to return to sources, how to revive an old dormant civilization and take part in universal civilization. The universalization of ideas, means, and materials and the resultant degradation of cultural identities and regional traditions predicted by Paul Ricoeur has been greatly accelerated by the recent phenomenon of global trade and the development of the internet. In this age of sameness and uniformity, how does architecture strive to retain its vitality and remain committed to place, region, and tradition? Therein lies the opportunity which I touched on at the start of this presentation. In this information age with no geographical barriers, there never was a better opportunity or a more urgent need to define our own architectural priorities and agendas. In this environment, it is essential that we know who we are, identify our strengths and weaknesses, recognize the major concerns and issues that confront us. I believe that this process is already underway, not consciously, but nonetheless quite actively. There are a number of great examples, but I would like to give just one. In the wake of the recent earthquake and flood disasters, we have begun in Pakistan to look at the nature of safe and affordable housing for rural communities. A number of architects working actively in this area have returned to the roots of our traditional construction technologies and revived those practices as the most sustainable and economical mode of construction. They have revived earth construction and introduced the use of bamboo as a viable and sustainable alternative to wood, steel, and concrete. While their work is immensely important and has set the ball rolling, a great deal more needs to be done. Earth and bamboo construction has many precedents and proponents throughout the world. There are both old, well-established traditions as well as recent innovations we can benefit from. The new connectivity and the death of geographical limits allows us to tap into that knowledge database. I had the opportunity to visit Bhutan last year. I discovered there a thriving tradition of earth construction. They use heavy rammed earth walls with readily available timber and bamboo for roof construction. In a country with limited arable land and small farms, it was surprising to see well-built three-story farmhouses liberally dotting the landscape, until we realized that the building material is abundant and cheap, and labor is plentiful and is provided by the community, with each house being built as a collaborative effort. It's all rammed earth construction, and it's done by the community. At the other end of the spectrum, we can look at the work of earth architecture pioneers like Anna Heringer and Martin Rauch. Anna Heringer won an Aga Khan Award for the school she designed and built in Bangladesh, while Martin Rauch is a practicing architect in Austria and had developed advanced processes for prefabrication of compressed earth blocks and rammed earth construction that pushed the envelope of earth construction into the 21st century. Both of these architects presented their work at the Arcasia Congress of Architects in Lahore in 2010. We need to tap into these knowledge databases in order to further our own information and research. The introduction of bamboo as a framing material in construction is similarly an important development. Bamboo is an extremely versatile and resilient material. It grows fast and is a more sustainable option to traditional timber. It is widely used for construction throughout the world, from Central and South America to East Asia. A great deal of information exists on bamboo construction, ranging from research on bamboo species and growing conditions, comparative loading and strength tests, development of construction details, and best building practices. No amount of success in the field will achieve this until these technologies become part of the curricula of architectural and engineering schools here. We need to generate our own bodies of research and develop standards of safe construction. This is the only way that we will generate our own agenda of architecture in the 21st century. These were just a couple of quick examples. I don't feel able or qualified to expand on this topic at this time. A lot of work remains to be done, but the path in my mind is clear. The point that is important is that we draft an indigenously developed set of priorities which addresses our local concerns and issues, which promotes sustainability and local solutions over imitation and global answers. That we do not see this as a curb on invention and creativity, but accept it as a challenge. We will find that there are innumerable examples out there in the barrier-free world to further our knowledge and creativity. Thank you.
Thank you, Arif.